Here it is. The guest focus opinion on this is no, no, and no. Hi there, Kelsey Toner here, the founder of Guest Focused Tour Business Coaching, where every day myself and our team of experienced tour business coaches help you build a thriving, profitable tour business. In this deep dive, we're going to be covering tour documentation, tour guide training systems for a growing tour business. Having comprehensive training systems and processes and documentation is crucial for not only ensuring a consistent quality, no matter who is leading your tours, but it's also about being able to scale a tour business beyond just yourself. Today, we're going to go through step by step some of the best practices associated with this documentation and give you tons of real world examples and inspiration for ensuring consistent quality across all of your tours. What are some of the core benefits of detailed tour documentation? Well, firstly, more consistent excellence. This helps you ensure that high quality tours are delivered to your guests every time. It streamlines your guide training, makes training new tour leaders quick and effective no matter what time of the year, even during your busy season. You've got brand scalability. Empower your team to accurately represent your brand. More uniform quality ensures consistent standards no matter the guide, even if you're using a contractor versus an employee. We've got cost savings, reduced training expenses, and resource wastage. And lastly, those time savings. You can free up your own schedule, get more of your time back for other business priorities. While this type of tour documentation, or documenting the systems and process of any part of your tour business, takes an upfront investment, know that this will pay dividends for years to come. It's also going to make your tour business more resilient and less dependent on you. A lot of this tour documentation is probably either in your head or possibly you're reliant on a couple of key staff members or trainers or experienced guides. And if that key person were to leave, or if you wanted to step back from the business, they would not be able to operate. This is what we want to fix here today. Okay, one of the first things that we want to create are those key deliverables and expectations. There are a number of different categories. We're going to go through each one, but here are some recommendations for you. These are the guest-facing tour descriptions and sales materials for any given tour that they are leading. We don't often think of these as training materials, but it's important to give this context to your tour leaders. Then a pre-tour checklist, on-tour logistics and timing, and a post-tour checklist. Let's have a look at some examples. Here's an example from inside our coaching program where Simon, one of our guest-focused coaches, shared some of his tour documentation for his Vice and Violence tour. Now, Simon leads these incredible sidecar tours in Paris. You'll see one of the first things that he shares is this guest-facing tour description. This can be as simple as a link, like Simon provided, to his website tour description. Here, guides can review exactly what guests have been promised and some of the key expectations their guests are likely to have. Next, Simon shared his pre-tour checklist. So we see here, have you cleaned guest helmets? Have you prepped rain gear? Do we have spare gloves? Do you have a waxed canvas and wool blanket? And tour leaders can go through and actually check these items off. Some of these are related to his motorcycle, others to his driver. For his on-tour logistics, he created a simple table that showed each stop, the approximate timing in the tour, and any notes, logistics, best practices, or common issues that guides should know about when leading this tour. Finally, he rounds things out with a post-tour checklist for each tour leader to complete after each tour. So what are some of the common mistakes that we see when creating these types of pre-tour and on-tour and post-tour checklists and key deliverables? Well, it's using statements that are too broad. What we want to have in here is really have this be very specific and measurable behaviors that you want your guests to do before, during, or after the tour. We want to communicate effectively and specifically on the behavior that we're looking for. Let's go through a couple examples to make this super clear. Make sure our guests are having a good time. Very, very broad. This is the type of thing that we typically expect from our tour leaders versus something much more specific that we could add to this checklist and make it clear that we would expect this specific behavior every time you lead a tour. So take the time during lunch to individually check in with each guest or group or family. Ask if they're having a good time or if they have any questions or concerns. This is a much more specific request and an example of a great key deliverable. Here's another one. Be ready for your tours. Far too broad, right? Versus be ready 15 minutes prior to your tour and be set up at the meeting location. Very clear, very measurable, right? Use this time to welcome guests, learn their names, and ask about their interests. Beautiful. One last example. Instead of just saying, yes, we welcome the guests, here is what we can do to be much more explicit. Individually welcome every guest as they arrive with a warm smile and introduce yourself. Take a moment to introduce those guests to other members of the tour. Taking the time to document these key deliverables in this way is going to set you up for success in a ton of ways. One, it's going to be really effective and clear communication for your guides. During a training process, I even recommend having guides actually sign off that they understand these key deliverables for before, during, and after the tour. It also helps eliminate some of that confusion or issues that come up when a tour leader says, well, hey, I do warmly welcome guests, I just didn't do it in the way that you wanted me to, right? So we can avoid this. The second really cool thing that you can do with this is you can actually use this now in a mystery shopper program, meaning you can have another participant come and they are anonymously evaluating, hey, did all of these things happen on this tour? You can even be open about a mystery shopper program with your tour leaders and emphasize that, hey, if you want to score really well on these mystery shoppers, be sure that every tour, to the greatest degree possible, you are delivering on these expectations. So of course, this is going to look different depending on the types of tours that you lead, but note even for multi-day tours, these types of checklists can be essential. Now, these checklists are going to look different depending on the details of your tour, but this works just as well for multi-day experiences. Here's an example pre-tour checklist where we are confirming restaurants by phone, text, or email prior to a multi-day itinerary. Are we checking the weather? Are we prepping any visual aids or doing any handouts and prints ahead of time? Are we washing vehicles? And just remember for the on-tour logistics that this can take many forms, right? You don't have to be stuck to one format. Here's another example from a guided tour at Chateau Claude Vougeot. This is a wine and biking tour in Burgundy. You can see here we have a description of the element, what's happening. We have a payment tip and notes. Hey, 150 euro cash to the wine and voyages guide, 20 euro tip. We have a 10 euro per person entrance fee. Hey, here's a guest heads up. Where are the bathrooms? Hey, they're located by the desk. Here's a leader heads up. Hey, the tour is going to last 60 minutes. Here are some vendor notes, maybe some key contact information. And then you can go through each element of the tour depending on what works for you. Okay, let's move on to the next important piece of tour documentation, and that is your tour content. What is it that your tour leader or guide is actually going to say? What is the informational content? Now, this brings up, of course, one of the thorniest topics: to script or not to script. Kelsey, isn't it best practice to write out word for word the exact things we want our tour leaders to say? Won't that lead to the consistency and quality that you're talking about? Well, my friends, here it is. The guest focus opinion on this is no, no, and no. We do not want to hold our guides and tour leaders to specific scripts where they are repeating something word for word. And here is the main reason. We strongly believe that a tour should adapt to those people who are on it. If we want to serve people at the highest possible level, you need to empower your tour leaders, guides, and experienced hosts to adapt the content of the tour in real time. This could be something as simple as noticing when the group is starting to shuffle or lose interest. We want to very quickly be able to tighten things up, move on, or to recognize that there might be interests, questions, passions, backgrounds of individuals, and we can adapt to better serve those people at the highest possible level. Now, does that mean that there is no place for scripts? Not necessarily. It might be important for a safety talk, or you might have a story that is really dialed in, and that can be powerful to include in this tour content. The real secret to success with your documentation here is to think in terms of stories, not scripts. So ideally, your tour content should be filled with stories, meaning they are written out. Now, this could be very much in the form of a script. Hey, here's a way that you could tell this story. But the key is that you're not asking your guys to memorize this and repeat it verbatim. You're asking them to note the narrative structure. You want to include things like character and conflict. Now, storytelling is beyond the scope of this particular video, but just know the term that we use is a story vault. Stories are so much more superior than your average script because they are focused on what? They're focused on keeping your audience engaged. They are more memorable. They're more impactful. They can have a long-lasting emotional impact on people. There is tension and we're holding back information and then releasing it in the form of climax and resolution. All of that structure, you could go through and have a really advanced storytelling class for your guides, or even better, in your tour documentation. Make sure that you are putting things into the story format. You can say, hey, this is a great story, or hey, these 3 to 5 stories are great to tell at this stop, because there might be something to gesture at. There might be some visual aids or cues that you can use at that particular stop. All of that is fantastic. But at the end of the day, the idea of a story vault is that these are succinct, short stories that are included in your tour documentation. And we really want to encourage our tour leaders to expand or shorten these stories depending on what's happening in front of them. Whether to tell this story or that story is a choice that the tour leader can make. And you might be thinking, wow, isn't this like memorizing a script, but then maybe memorizing 3 or 4 tours? Do you think that our tour leaders are actually going to be able to do that? Yes, yes, and yes, if these are in the story format. That's the beauty of these stories. Not only are they more memorable for your guests, but they are more memorable for your guides. Here's a great example of this story vault in action, where at each stop, there was a story that the guide was instructed to tell. And these stories could be made longer or shorter depending on what was happening in real time. And don't get me wrong, it can be totally appropriate to include a sample opening remarks or welcome, as we see here. I love the idea, especially for safety talks and orientations, to give examples to inspire the tour leaders beyond what they might see on shadowing a tour with an experienced tour leader. Now, I must warn you, a lot of these stories that are told on tours around the world by well-meaning tour guides are not actually stories at all. It is essential that you have a key character that has human characteristics. It's essential that you have conflict and tension and that you have a plot. Now, if you are interested in learning more about extraordinary storytelling for tour leaders, in our coaching program, we have a complete training that you can share with your team, you could give to your tour guide trainers. If you're interested in knowing more about that, reach out and we'll be happy to share about how it works. However, beyond just our story vault, another key part of tour content is something we call the guest FAQ. Simply put, what are the most frequently asked questions by your guests on tours? This is a great document to share with new trainees, and it should be a living, breathing document that can evolve and be added to as more tours are led. Here's a real-world example of what this could look like, and honestly, it is so simple to put together. These are some of the most frequently asked questions I got leading my Burgundy bicycle tours. Hey, how large is Burgundy? What's the population of Burgundy? What's the deal with all these canals? What is the climate like here? What's so special about that city of Beaune? Hey, what are all those white cows? These questions came up over and over and over again, and it was invaluable for the new tour leaders who are coming in to lead this tour for the very first time to actually just sit down and go through 3 or 4 pages of the most commonly asked questions. This is strategic memorization. It's strategic knowledge building for some of the most frequent and important questions your guests are going to ask. So for your tour content documentation, you can build this story vault and this guest FAQ in a couple of different ways. It might be relevant and probably is to do this on a per tour basis. That way you've got different stories, different content, and probably some different questions that are regularly coming up. Let's contrast this with some of the common mistakes. Believe me, I was a tour leader for many, many years, over a decade, and I saw some terrible tour documentation. Here are some of the things we want to avoid. One is having these backgrounders that were sometimes called, that were like 40, 50 pages of just dense text. These, I guess, were given in the hopes that we would just absorb all of this knowledge or that we would study like our lives depended on it for some SAT or college level degree. These are simply not effective. It is not in that narrative structure. These very rarely had stories and were difficult and challenging as a tour leader, as a guide to remember. Your guides and your tour leaders will struggle in the same way. Also, if you're just linking out to a lot of additional resources, that can be fine, especially empowering tour leaders to go the extra mile and maybe read this great book on local history, or hey, here's a great biography. But keep in mind that unless these are easily consumable, they're probably not going to be taken that seriously. I was given all kinds of recommended reading, sometimes even a page of links that were then oftentimes just links out to other dense text. So think about if you are providing additional resources. Could those be videos? Could they be podcasts? Is there some way that you could leverage ChatGPT and generative AI to transform some of that content into stories for you? You bet you. But the key here is we want to empower and set our tour leaders up for success. We don't want to provide them with a lot of links and dense text they are simply not going to use or remember. Here's a couple more best practices to inspire you and get you thinking about how you can enhance your tour documentation. The first is 100% lean into recording and using our incredible smartphones to capture some of your most talented tour leaders in action. If you know that Beth gives the best version of that safety talk, step by step, and absolutely nails it and adds in just the right amount of humor to keep attention, then absolutely record Beth and include a link to her giving that world-class, just how you want it to be delivered safety talk. I saw a number of these working for tour companies, and it gave me a lot of inspiration to model people that had either left the company some time ago, or I just didn't have the opportunity to actually see them in action. Hint, hint, some of the people who best lead your tour's activities and experiences might be you. So this is an opportunity to capture the way that you want that tour to be led. Very often with a lavalier microphone or a smartphone with a little bit of stabilization, we can have a really high quality recording, and it is worth the investment for your training and tour documentation. I have this very specific memory of leading tours in the Netherlands and Belgium, and these were bike tours, and we used this fietspath system, which is the bike path system in both of these countries. Now, it's pretty complex, and for a lot of people from North America, it was difficult to navigate, and you had to really wrap your head around what was going on with all these tiny signs and arrows and numbers. And one of the tour leaders, Andy, did this unbelievably humorous and really effective explanation of how this works. Basically a simple orientation and logistic talk. But they recorded that video, and I remember studying it and watching it over and over, and then absolutely mastering the best way to explain this. Finally, don't forget about those props and visual aids that can have such an impact on the guest experience. Make sure in your tour content or tour logistics that you're covering how to use these tools. I remember a bus transfer. This was actually in the Netherlands, and we were looking out at some of the dams and hydroelectric projects, but they were in the distance and it wasn't a great experience. So I remember I printed out a number of visual aids. As I was telling stories, I was able to share these and really create a much more powerful and impactful experience for the guests, help them wrap their heads around some of the incredible engineering that was happening all around them. Now, from that, we actually built that into the tour documentation, so future leaders knew where to find those visual aids and props and how to use them. Okay, we hope that you've been inspired by some of these best practices when it comes to documentation for your tours and having the world-class training system for your tour leaders. Many of these best practices come from our own personal experience and our coaching team, many of whom have built and scaled hugely successful tour and activity businesses while maintaining that tour leading excellence and quality up to multi-million dollars in annual revenue. If you are a little bit overwhelmed, well, of course it is time to take action, but keep in mind, even taking some initial steps towards this type of tour documentation can have enormous benefits in your organization. Start with some of the things we talked about here today, from key deliverables, having a pre-tour checklist, having your guides sign off on some of these things, and then we can work on that tour content. We can work on that story vault. We can maybe record yourself or some of your best tour leaders in action and layer that in to this documentation through time. Don't be overwhelmed, but do take some first steps here today. Look, if you are interested in getting some support with this, there is no better person to connect with than somebody who has gone on the path that you're looking to do. If you would like to connect with one of our tour business coaches and ask them straight up, hey, I'm really struggling with this particular tour. I'm not sure the best way to document this. Hey, I really am nervous about some of the quality that's slipping on our tours and activities. Know that we are working with tour business owners around the world every day on these types of issues, and it would be our pleasure to work more closely with you. You can book a call with one of our tour business coaches absolutely free of charge, a free 45-minute strategy call where we can focus on you, your goals, and your tour business. Use the link below, guestfocus.com/book a call, and we'd love to speak with you. Okay, let me know in the comments down below. What is your favorite type of tour documentation? Is there any best practice that you could share with our community and audience? We'd love for you to subscribe, ring the bell if you are here on YouTube that says, hey, get notified when another of these amazing videos comes out. Do all of that stuff and share this with a friend or colleague if you think it would be of value to them. Thanks so much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you in our next video.